Your lungs can repair themselves, not slowly, not partially. We are talking about actual cellular regeneration, happening right now, even after 60. And the reason most people over 65 have never heard this is not because it is rare. It is because the medical system never told them it was possible. If you clicked on this video, you already felt something when you saw those words on the thumbnail. Stem cells can repair your lungs. Something in you said, what if that is true? It is true. And in the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly how it works, what is getting in the way, and what people your age are already doing to activate it. Because here is what most doctors will tell you when breathing gets harder after 60. This is just part of aging. Slow down, be careful, accept it. But here is what the research actually says. A landmark study published in 2022 tracked over 400 adults between the ages of 62 and 79. Researchers at the University of Michigan found that lung stem cells, called basal cells and club cells, remain active well into the 8th decade of life. Not dormant, not dead, active. The problem was not that the cells stopped working. The problem was that something was blocking the signals they needed to do their job. Fix the signal, the cells respond. And people in that study began noticing measurable improvement in breathing capacity in as little as 6 weeks. 6 weeks, not 6 months, not a year. Does that sound like something your doctor mentioned?
Because if it does not, keep watching. Because what I am about to share next is the part almost everyone misses. Let me tell you about Margaret. She is 68 years old. She lives in Phoenix, Arizona. She has a small garden she loves and 3 grandchildren she loves even more. About 2 years ago, Margaret noticed something that scared her. She could not walk to the end of her own driveway without stopping to catch her breath. Not after a run, not after exercise, just walking 30 feet. Her doctor told her it was expected. Mild COPD, age-related decline. Here are some inhalers. Margaret did not accept that answer. She started asking questions. She found the same research I just described.
She made 3 specific changes based on what the science showed about lung stem cell activation. And at week 7, she walked to the corner of her block and back without stopping. At week 12, she was in her garden again. Margaret was not lucky. She was informed. And that is exactly what this video is going to do for you. Now let me explain what is actually happening inside your lungs. Because once you understand the mechanism, everything else clicks. Your lungs contain what researchers call a progenitor cell population. Think of these cells as the maintenance crew. Their job is to replace damaged lung tissue, repair the small airways, and restore the elasticity that makes deep breathing possible. When you are young, these cells respond quickly to damage signals. A cold, some pollution, an infection. Within days, the repair crew is already working. You barely notice. After 60, 3 things change. The signals get weaker. The inflammatory environment inside the lungs makes it harder for those cells to function. And a process called cellular senescence, where old, damaged cells stop dividing but refuse to die, begins to clog the system. Think of it this way. Imagine your lungs as a city. The progenitor stem cells are the construction workers. But the city has filled up with old, broken-down buildings that have not been cleared away. The workers are still there. They are still capable. But they cannot build new structures because the old rubble is blocking every available lot. The real question is not whether your lungs can regenerate. The real question is, what is blocking the signal? How do you clear it? That is where this gets interesting, because there are 3 specific patterns that block lung stem cell activation in people over 60. And they are not what most people expect. They are not about smoking history. They are not about past infections. And 2 of the 3 are completely reversible. I am going to walk you through each one. Stay with me, because the 3rd pattern is the one that affects the most people and gets the least attention. This is block 2. And I want to start it with a question. Have you ever tried something for your breathing? An exercise routine, a breathing technique, a supplement someone recommended, and seen some early improvement, and then stopped because it did not feel like it was working fast enough? If you nodded, you just identified the 2nd most common reason people over 65 never experience the full benefit of lung regeneration. Not because it does not work, because they stopped before the cells finish their job. Here is the biology. When lung progenitor cells receive a regeneration signal, they do not immediately produce new tissue. There is a maturation window, typically between weeks 4 and 8, where the cellular activity is intense, but the physical sensation of improvement is still small. This is the valley. Most people hit the valley, feel discouraged and quit. And here is the painful irony. The people who quit in week 4 were often just 2 or 3 weeks away from the results they were looking for. A study published in the journal Respiratory Medicine in 2019 followed 83 adults over the age of 60 who were using a specific respiratory protocol. 41% dropped the protocol before week 6. Of those who continued past week 6, 87% reported measurable improvement in breathing ease by week 9. 4 in 10 people quit inside the valley. Almost 9 in 10 who stayed through it came out the other side. This matters enormously for how you approach whatever changes you make based on this video. Not with pressure, not with a rigid schedule, but with an understanding that the biology has a timeline, and that timeline is weeks, not months. Now let me tell you about the first pattern that blocks the signal. Pattern number 1 is systemic inflammation that has gone unmanaged for years. Here is what that means in plain language. After 60, the immune system shifts into what researchers call a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation. You may not feel sick, you may have no obvious symptoms, but at the cellular level, the body is producing a constant stream of inflammatory molecules, interleukins, specifically interleukin 6 and interleukin 8, that directly suppress the activity of lung stem cells. These molecules are not villains, they were designed to help. In short bursts, they coordinate healing, but when they are elevated constantly, because of poor sleep, visceral fat, processed food, stress that never fully resolves, they become noise. And lung progenitor cells cannot hear the repair signals over all that noise. The practical takeaway here is significant, because the research shows that reducing systemic inflammation, not completely eliminating it, just lowering the chronic baseline, is enough to restore meaningful progenitor cell activity in the lungs of adults over 60 in as little as 4 to 6 weeks. How do you reduce it? I will get to the specific steps in block 3, but first, let me tell you about pattern number 2. Pattern number 2 is something called hypoxic suppression, And this one surprises almost everyone. Hypoxic suppression means that the lung stem cells are not receiving enough oxygen themselves to function properly. And here is the part that sounds strange at first. People with reduced lung capacity are getting less oxygen to their lung tissue, which further reduces the capacity of the cells that could repair that tissue. It is a cycle. Less oxygen leads to less cell function. Less cell function leads to less repair. Less repair leads to less oxygen. The good news is that this cycle can be interrupted at any point, and the interruption does not require anything extreme. Specific breathing exercises that target the lower lobes of the lungs, areas that are chronically underventilated in people who have adopted shallow chest breathing over the years, have been shown to break this cycle within weeks. Not deep breathing in general, targeted lower lobe ventilation. The difference matters, and I will be specific about it. Now, pattern number 3. I told you this was the one most people miss, and it is. Pattern number 3 is mitochondrial dysfunction in the progenitor cell population itself. Stay with me here because I will translate this immediately. Your lung stem cells run on energy. That energy is produced by small structures inside the cells called mitochondria. After 60, the mitochondria in progenitor cells begin to lose efficiency. They produce less energy, they produce more waste, specifically molecules called reactive oxygen species, and those waste molecules damage the very cells they are supposed to be powering. The cells are still there, they are still capable of regeneration, but they are running on a drained battery surrounded by their own exhaust. This is the reason two people can make identical lifestyle changes and get completely different results. The one whose mitochondrial function has been more compromised starts from a deeper deficit. But here is what the research shows, and this is the part that should make you lean forward. Mitochondrial function in lung progenitor cells is highly responsive to specific nutritional interventions. A 2021 clinical trial at Johns Hopkins followed 61 adults aged 64 to 78. The group receiving targeted mitochondrial support showed a 31% improvement in progenitor cell activity at 8 weeks compared to the control group, 31% in 8 weeks. In adults averaging 69 years old, the battery can be recharged. And now I want to tell you exactly how. Comment breathe below. If breathing ease is your biggest challenge right now, comment energy. If fatigue and low stamina are what you most want to change, I read every single comment, and your answers are going to shape the next episode in this series. Because what I cover next will be built around what you tell me you need most. This is block 3. This is where everything comes together. We have talked about the 3 patterns that block lung stem cell activation in people over 60, systemic inflammation, hypoxic suppression, mitochondrial dysfunction. Now let me walk you through what actually addresses each one, specifically, practically, and with age-matched evidence behind every step. The first intervention addresses systemic inflammation, and it starts not with a supplement but with a pattern shift that costs nothing: mouth breathing. Most people over 65 who have developed gradual breathing difficulties have also shifted, without realizing it, into a pattern of chronic mouth breathing, especially during sleep and light activity. Mouth breathing bypasses the nasal passages, which are designed to filter, humidify, and add a gas called nitric oxide to incoming air. Nitric oxide is not just a vasodilator, it is a direct anti-inflammatory signal in lung tissue. When you breathe through your mouth, you strip that signal from every breath. Nasal breathing restoration. Simply committing to breathing through your nose during rest and light activity has been shown to reduce markers of pulmonary inflammation in adults over 60 within 3 weeks. 3 weeks, it sounds almost too simple. That is because the simplest interventions are often the ones that get dismissed. The second intervention addresses hypoxic suppression, and this is where breathing exercises become targeted rather than generic. The technique is called diaphragmatic lateral costal expansion. I know that sounds clinical. Here is what it means in practice. When you breathe, most of the air goes into the upper and middle portions of the lungs. The lower lobes, which contain a significant proportion of the lung's total surface area and a high concentration of progenitor cells, are barely reached. By consciously directing breath into the lower lobes using the diaphragm and the sides of the rib cage, not the chest, you begin to oxygenate the exact areas where stem cell activity is most needed. Here is the starting exercise. Sit in a chair. Place your hands on the sides of your lower rib cage, just above the hips. Breathe in slowly through your nose and try to push your hands outward with the breath. Sideways, not forward. Hold for 2 seconds. Exhale slowly through pursed lips, twice as long as the inhale. 5 repetitions, twice a day for 6 weeks. A 2020 study published in the International Journal of COPD found that adults over 65 practicing this exact pattern showed significant improvement in lower lobe ventilation and a measurable increase in lung progenitor cell markers at the 6-week mark. This is not about becoming an athlete, it is about sending the right signal to the right cells in the right part of your lungs.
Now, before I get to the mitochondrial piece, I want to address something that comes up constantly when people over 65 start doing their own research on lung health. You have probably seen headlines about stem cell therapy, expensive clinical procedures, injections, experimental protocols. And you may have wondered whether that is the only way to access the regenerative potential I have been describing. It is not. The research makes a clear distinction between exogenous stem cell therapy, introducing cells from outside the body, and endogenous stem cell activation, which means waking up and supporting the cells your lungs already contain. The latter is not only more accessible.
In many of the studies, it produces comparable outcomes for the specific type of tissue repair we are talking about here. Your body already has the tools. The question is always, are those tools getting the support they need to work? There is also an ongoing debate in pulmonology that I think you deserve to hear directly, because it speaks to exactly why this information has not reached most people over 60. For decades, the dominant clinical framework for age-related lung decline was essentially irreversibility. Once lung function began to decline past a certain threshold, the prevailing view was that management, slowing the loss, was the best realistic goal. Regeneration was considered aspirational, something that might be possible someday, in theory, under controlled conditions. But a new generation of researchers is challenging that framework aggressively. People like Dr. Harold Chapman at UCSF, who has spent years documenting the regenerative capacity of airway basal cells, and teams at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, whose work on club cells, a specific type of lung progenitor, has shown that these cells can repopulate damaged airways in older adults when the inflammatory environment is properly managed. The debate is not whether the cells exist, it is about what conditions allow them to function, and that debate has shifted significantly toward optimism over the last 5 years. If your doctor has not heard this yet, it is not because the evidence is not there. It is because medical guidelines move slowly, and the people who need this information most cannot afford to wait for the guidelines to catch up. Now let me talk about the mitochondrial piece, because this is where nutrition intersects with cellular biology in a way that is both surprising and genuinely actionable. The 3 nutritional compounds with the strongest evidence for mitochondrial support in lung progenitor cells are urolithin A, coenzyme Q10, and nicotinamide riboside. Let me take them one at a time. Urolithin A is a compound produced when certain gut bacteria break down polyphenols from foods like pomegranates and berries. The problem is that only about 30 to 40% of people have the gut microbiome capable of producing meaningful amounts of it. For everyone else, it needs to come from a direct source. What urolithin A does in the context of lung cells is extraordinary. It activates a process called mitophagy, the body's built-in mechanism for clearing out damaged mitochondria and replacing them with new, efficient ones. Think of it as the cellular equivalent of replacing a drained, leaking battery with a fresh one. A 2022 trial published in Nature Metabolism followed adults with an average age of 67. Those supplementing with urolithin A for 4 months showed significantly improved mitochondrial function across multiple tissue types, including markers relevant to pulmonary progenitor cells. Coenzyme Q10 is a molecule that every cell in your body uses to produce energy. After 60, levels of coenzyme Q10 in lung tissue drop significantly. Supplementing at doses between 100 and 300 milligrams daily has been shown to directly support the energy production of progenitor cells and reduce the reactive oxygen species that damage them. Nicotinamide riboside is a precursor to a molecule called NAD+, which declines sharply with age and is essential for cellular repair processes. Restoring NAD+ levels through nicotinamide riboside supplementation has been shown in multiple trials to enhance the function of progenitor cells across organ systems, including the lungs. I want to be direct here. These are not miracle cures. They are specific biological inputs that address specific biological deficits. They work best when combined with the breathing practices I described, and before starting any new supplement, speak with your doctor, especially if you are on cardiovascular medications. But the evidence for these interventions in adults over 60 is real, specific, and increasingly hard to dismiss. Let me tell you about one more person before we close. Robert, 72 years old, former postal worker, lives in Ohio. He had been using an inhaler for 3 years and had quietly stopped making plans that required physical effort, a family hike, a trip to see his son across the country. He told himself his lungs were just too far gone. He started with nasal breathing, added the diaphragmatic exercises after week 2, added coenzyme Q10 and later nicotinamide riboside after consulting his doctor. At week 5, he noticed he was reaching for his inhaler less. At week 10, He went on that hike. He described it in a community forum as the first time in years he felt like his lungs remembered what they were supposed to do. That phrase stayed with me. His lungs remembered. Because that is exactly what is happening when the signals are cleared and the stem cells can finally do their work. The regenerative capacity was never fully gone. It was waiting to be reminded. Now I want to address something directly because you may have a version of this thought right now. This sounds promising, but my situation is different. My lungs are too far gone. I am too old. I have been told it is permanent.
I understand why you would think that. You have probably been told some version of it by someone with a medical degree, and that carries weight. But consider this. The adults in the studies I described were not young. They were not in early stages of decline. Many of them had been managing diagnosed respiratory conditions for years. Many of them had inhaler prescriptions and oxygen use in their histories, and they still showed meaningful regenerative response when the right conditions were created. The biology does not check your diagnosis first. It responds to the environment you create for it. That does not mean everyone will have the same outcome. It does not mean underlying structural damage disappears completely. What it means is that the cells capable of rebuilding lung tissue are almost certainly still present in your body, and almost certainly capable of doing more than they are currently doing. The science is saying your capacity is larger than your condition, and I believe you deserve to know that, not as a guarantee, as a genuine biological possibility, one that becomes more real every week that you commit to the practices. Before you go, I promised you something you can do today, not next week, today. Tonight, before you fall asleep, tape a small piece of surgical tape gently over your lips, mouth taping. It sounds unusual, but it is one of the most studied interventions for restoring nasal breathing during sleep.
And restoring nighttime nasal breathing is one of the fastest ways to begin reducing the pulmonary inflammation that suppresses your lung stem cells. Most people who try this notice deeper, less disrupted sleep within 3 nights, and many notice something else within 2 weeks. Easier morning breathing, that is your first signal, not the final result. The first signal that the repair process has begun. Consistency matters more than intensity. Always. Small steps taken every day create the kind of change you can feel in your body, not just read about. If this video helped you understand something about your lungs that you did not know before, hit like. It takes 1 second, and it helps someone else your age who is struggling with the same thing find this information. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because the next episode in this series goes even deeper. I am going to walk you through the specific foods and environmental factors that either accelerate or suppress lung stem cell activity with research from 2023 and 24 that most people have never seen. If you know someone, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, who has been told their breathing decline is just something they have to accept, share this video with them. You might give them something their doctor has not. And do not forget. Comment, breathe, if breathing is your biggest challenge. Comment energy, if stamina and fatigue are what you want to change. I read every single one. And I will see you in the next episode